So in today's lesson, we're going to be looking at the history of travel and tourism and its implications for the travel and tourism industry. It's important to consider the history because it lets us know how we got to the current state of where we are, where we've been, and the potential future implications of where travel might be going. And in this lesson, we'll be breaking this up into three main sections. We'll start by doing a brief history of travel to see where we've been. We'll look at what the modern travel industry looks like and what modern travel looks like for tourists. And finally, we'll use this information to speculate on what the future of travel may look like. Now, why does the history matter? This is a geography class. Well, this can tell us a lot about the travel and tourism industry. Throughout history, developments in travel and tourism can help us tell us about the growth of tourism. It can help us make future projections for tourism. It can tell us how events, changes, and trends in society have had and continue to have an impact on travel and tourism. And it lets us discuss the implications of major world events on travelers and the tourism industry. Now, in the 21st century, the tourism industry is very important to the global economy. It's estimated that over 1 billion people travel for the purpose of tourism every year, and on average, these people spend about $1,000 per trip on things such as their accommodations, their meals, entertainment, and shopping. And worldwide, it's estimated that tourism receipts have totaled more than $1 trillion every year since 2011. Now, although tourism is so omnipresent in our current society, it really is only a recent phenomenon. Until the 20th century, only a small portion of society had the time or money to travel. Because of economic, social, and technological changes, a larger percentage of the population can now enjoy traveling. So there's lots of reasons why this has happened. One is the example of labor laws, which guarantee paid vacation time for workers. So on average, a worker might get 3 weeks of paid vacation per year. This wasn't always the case. If we went back 150 years, workers were working on, in many cases, 6 days a week and were not getting any time off during the year. They were going to work every day, getting very little time off. They simply didn't have the time to travel. And even if they did, people didn't have a whole lot of excess money to spend on travel. And as a result, travel was sort of reserved for those who were rich and had lots of time on their hands. The idea of traveling for vacation would have been practically unfeasible for most people until very recently. In the age of exploration, only those with government financial backing could afford to travel, and it was done to explore and colonize new lands. If you think about Europeans such as Christopher Columbus or Marco Polo, they were able to travel around the world, but only because they had governments paying for it for them. These weren't just individuals who decided to do it for fun. With the Industrial Revolution, however, work became less labor intensive, and thus began the beginnings of the concept of leisure. And when we look back into the 1800s, we can see the beginnings of this idea of traveling around the world. So we could look at the famous Jules Verne novel, Around the World in 80 Days, which tells the story of a rich English person traveling around the world in 80 days to win a bet of 20,000 English pounds. Now, what this tells us is that by the end of the 19th century, people are starting to conceive of people traveling around the world, not because they're off exploring distant lands, but simply for the fun of it. So here we have a man trying to win a bet by traveling around the world. And even though it's a fictional tale, it's sort of signaling to us that at this time, people are starting to think about travel in a different way. For many at this time, travel was about adventure. So we could look at the idea of the Grand Tour, which was a European concept of travel that was popular for young English men in the 17th and 18th century. During this time, they often spent 2 to 4 years of their formative years traveling around Europe. And it was done in an effort to broaden their horizons and learn about languages, architecture, geography, and culture. However, this was limited almost exclusively to the upper class. So those with noble blood, those who had lots of money and lots of means. They were the only ones who could afford to do this or have the time to do this. But those who were able to often did. Now, the history of travel is mirrored in travel advertisements. So here are some examples that could make you dream of places you've never been before if you were living during these times. Here's an example from 1904 of a postcard of the camps and cottages at Lake Placid. So Lake Placid is a resort in New York State. It hosted the Olympics in 1932 and 1980. And it's sort of a place where people in New York could go on vacation and, for leisure, to get away from it, to get away from the city. They'd go up here and they could go out on the water. They could go skiing in the wintertime. They had all these options. By the early 1900s, we're starting to see the beginnings of these leisure resorts springing up. Here's an advertisement for California telling people to come play in the sands from 1919. So the idea of trying to bring people in and take advantage of the local environment to attract tourists from all around the country. And finally, here we have an advertisement for Japanese tourism from 1931, sort of advertising the religious and cultural aspects of coming to Japan to see local culture and local religious sites. And here we have an advertisement for a world trip from 1933. And you can see on the advertisement here, it says you can go as you please around the world for $749 first class. You can visit 21 ports and 14 cities. So at this time, again, this is becoming a lot more affordable for people. Again, that Jules Verne novel had only come out 60 years before. Traveling around the world to win a bet of $20,000. It's something that is seen as sort of exotic and hard to obtain. Here by 1933, what we're seeing is people having the ability to not only travel around the world, but do it for a relatively inexpensive price, or at least one that many people could afford to do. Now, modern travel is mass tourism. Mass tourism is the movement of large numbers of people to specialized tourist locations. It can include whole resort towns, theme parks, and tourism business districts which have been developed to cater to huge numbers of tourists. So think of something like Walt Disney World in Florida, where it's been designed to specifically accommodate tourists who want to come and visit all the Disney locations. That's the entire purpose of the trip. Now, these mass tourist locations can be contrasted with what we call alternative tourism, which involves more authentic and personalized interactions with local communities and the environment. So again, if we're thinking of that Florida example, instead of going to Disney World, you could think about going to the Everglades and exploring the local environment and how that's a different experience than going to Disney World. Now, how did we get here? Well, there are several factors which have led to this explosion in mass tourism over the past century. One of the biggest factors in the explosion of tourism was the emergence of the automobile. Cars started to become commonplace in the 1920s, and this allowed families to travel longer distances for travel. After World War I, we saw the development of highway networks such as the U.S. Interstate System and the Ontario 400 Series highway system, which allowed travel over even larger distances. And it also included the flexibility of travel. Having a car meant that you could do lots of different trips. You could take short day trips if you only wanted to go close by. You could drive for an hour or two and visit somewhere close by, or you could do days-long road trips. Another major factor in the evolution of tourism in the 20th century was the emergence of the jumbo jet. Now, although we'd had planes since the beginning of the 1900s, they only really started to be used for mass commercial travel sort of post-World War II. Now, the Boeing 747 is often referred to by the nickname of the jumbo jet because it's the world's most recognizable aircraft, and it was the first wide-body commercial airliner ever produced. It first came into service in the 1960s, and what it did was it allowed relatively cheap and quick intercontinental travel. So now not only could people travel around the world, they could go from North America to Europe in a few hours. They didn't have to wait days or weeks to take a boat across the ocean. So this is opening up plenty of new opportunities for people to travel in all new places. And by the 1960s and 70s, people wanted to go on a vacation without the worry of organizing all the details. So commercial holiday companies soon offered package vacations for people to enjoy. So think of vacations in places like Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic, where you can go and you pay one set fee and you get all your services included in it. Your food, drinks, accommodations, your flight over, it's all one set price that you paid to go there. Similarly, in the latter half of the 20th century, we start to see the growth in the popularity of cruise liners. Now, this is similar to a package vacation in the sense that you're paying one set fee for everything, your travel, your food, your lodging, etc. But for some, cruise vacations might provide other benefits, such as cost savings, convenience, and fun, because you sit in one place, you go to many different locations, you travel around in the boat, You might stop at a port for a day and you get back on the boat and you go to another port. So cruise vacations are one of those industries that are growing around the world in terms of tourism. Now, with that in mind, what are some emerging trends that we see in travel and tourism? It hasn't always looked the same as it does today. How might it look in the future? Now, one popular conception of what the future of travel might look like could include something like space tourism. So space tourism would involve sending people into either orbit the Earth, to visit a space station, or perhaps to even land on another body in the solar system, such as the Moon or Mars, etc. Right now, this has not occurred. For the most part, space travel at this point is restricted to astronauts who need government funding in order to do it, or to a select few companies that are sending people up into low Earth orbit to orbit the Earth a few times before they return home. But even then, they're not really going up as far as even what the International Space Station is. That's not to say that this is not going to be something that we could do in the future. In fact, there's no reason why we couldn't do this right now. We've put people on the moon before. It's simply a matter of cost. But if you remember back to the start of this lesson, traveling from continent to continent used to be something that only governments could do. Those people like Magellan and Columbus and Marco Polo, they needed governments to pay for them to sail across the seas. So even though right now it's only governments that are really putting, that might not be the case. This might be a very popular form of travel as costs come down. Another consideration is the emergence of computer technology. So this can impact tourism in a few ways. For one, it's already made booking trips a whole lot easier. If you were to look back 20, 30 years ago, booking a trip would involve going to a travel agent who would then take care of all the logistics of booking your trip for you, booking your hotel room, booking your flight, coordinating everything, giving you information, even just researching where you want to go. You'd have to go to a travel store and look at brochures and try to think of where you want to go. Now we can do that all online, super easy. There's plenty of apps you can explore to try to get a sense of what you'd want to do, and you can book through them. While you're in a location, you don't necessarily even have to have planned everything out ahead of time. Think of apps like Uber that you can easily use to get a ride around town, or an Airbnb if you need to book a place while you're staying. Tons of apps available for people. The flip side of this is the potential for computer-enhanced experiences for travelers. So we already have this in a certain sense with something like Google Maps or Google Street View. You can look and see what a location looks like all around the world. If you want to visit Paris and you've never been there before, you can get a sense of what the street's like just by going on something like Google Street View. Now, obviously, this isn't the same as actually traveling there, but it's conceivable that in the not-too-distant future, things like virtual reality might be able to give people the experience of traveling without actually leaving their home. And another conception of how travel might change in the future is the idea of retirement travel. So as populations age, we're going to have more retired people, and retired people need something to do with their lives because people are living not only into retirement, they're living a lot longer into retirement than they used to. On average, about 60, 70 years ago, people might have lived about 5 years into their retirement. Now people are routinely living 15, 20, 25, 30 years past their retirement age. So they need something to do with their time. So travel is becoming an increasingly popular choice for what seniors want to do in retirement. So what we might see in the future is travel destinations which start to cater more and more towards seniors, as they might overtake younger people as the ones who travel the most. So in summary, in today's lesson you learned that the modern travel and tourism industry dates back to the late 1800s when long-distance travel became more affordable. Technological innovations such as cars, airplanes, and the internet have made tourism more mainstream, and future trends in travel include space travel, computer-assisted travel, and retirement tourism.